the amount of people coming in has slowed down a bit. So welcome everyone. Really appreciate you coming out and joining us this evening and taking time to talk about commercial parking amendments and requirements. So we have quite a bit to discuss this evening. So we're gonna, kind of get going and kind of run through this. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple things. I am Dan Bursick. I am the section manager for co-development for the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services. We also have some city staff that's joined us and some facilitators that'll be helping kind of organize the meeting. So we have Corin Manning, who's here. She's the planning administrator for Planning and Development Services. We have Acacia Dupierre, who is the lead planner for Planning and Development Services and is the project manager for this project. We have Tani Robertson from Southwest Decision Resources, helping with the facilitation. And we have Colleen Whitaker, also from Southwest Decision Resources, helping with the facilitation. So for this meeting, we're going to kind of go over two parts of this proposed commercial parking amendments. We have one portion related to electric vehicle readiness and some of the proposals related to that. And then we have a second portion that talks about individual parking plan amendments to address, and those really to address kind of affordable housing, as well as parking reductions for bars and restaurants to support more permanent street eateries program that was directed by Mayor and Council. To help us balance this conversation, we have created a poll to get an understanding of who is here and for what topic. So you'll see a poll pop up. If you could please fill that out, it'll help us to kind of structure the meeting as we go through and make sure that everyone has that opportunity and we can structure the conversation related to that. Let me see if I can. Acacia, I think you may need to set up the poll or put the poll out.
Acacia, do you have launch poll on your menu? Oh, there you go.
Okay, well, as we're trying to get the poll set up, because we will have a little bit of time to fill
Daniel,
up.
it's going now.
Oh, is it going? Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
you just can't see it, maybe because you're host. Yeah,
no, I definitely can't. Excellent. Okay.
So I'll tell you when it seems like we've got 15 out of 25, 18, 19. And that might be the end.
The rest is probably us.
The rest is probably us. So, oh, well, here we got 22 already. Excellent. Okay, I'm just going to click end poll myself.
Okay.
And then here's the results, just so everybody can see.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Great. So no, thanks for that. It looks like we have some that are a bunch that are equally, a bunch that are for one or the other. So it's pretty mixed across the board as far as the distribution there. So additionally, we also have a comment card to provide your feedback. So basically, I'm going to put the comment card into the link, into the chat. So you, that might not work. Let me do this instead. This link here. So put that there. So feel free to access the comment card, click on which topic you'd like, and then fill it out. You can fill out multiple ones. So if you wanted to do one on each topic, you just have to do 2 of them essentially. And then additionally, we also have a presentation. We have a copy of the presentation, which is kind of like a handout that we'll be putting in the chat as well. So if you wanted to go back and kind of reference something or look at it while we're going through and having the discussion, it'll be there for you. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well for you. So that's there. With that, I'm going to actually pass this over to Tani, who's going to go over some meeting agreements and just kind of some housekeeping items related to the meeting.
Excellent, thanks. Nice to be with you all this evening. So we've got the meeting agreements pulled up. These, you all are meeting goers and pretty good at this, but just as a gentle reminder, to be concise, that we have limited time, want to make sure everyone has the chance to speak. If you can respect time limits, if you're and be respectful of others and of differing viewpoints. We're trying to have these meetings to be diverse viewpoints on both topics. Assume the best of intentions in your fellow community members. And if you can try to stay on topic. In terms of the opportunities, we're going to have two different opportunities for conversation and comments and questions, one after each of the presentations. You can go to that chat, that link that Daniel shared, and we'll reshare it later as well. You can also type your comment in chat if you prefer. That everybody sees it if it's in chat. People don't see it if it's in the form. And maybe note if it's EV related or parking related. And then if you can please raise your hand if you want to speak, stay on mute, the normal Zoom protocol. If you'd like to have your camera on, then we'll feel like we're all in a meeting together, and that's your choice. So I think we're going to get started. If any of you have any audio-visual Zoom challenges, raise your hand. You can also manually raise it, and we'll try to help you address it. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started with the introductory presentation by Acacia.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Tani. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. So I'm going to give some background on the proposal and how it covers two components that came out of city initiatives with overlapping goals, talking about climate action, local business support, infill development, walkable neighborhoods, namely how we use space in the city for parking. And so with parking as the commonality, rules and regulations for the space reserved for parking are covered in a section of the Unified Development Code. And this proposal is to change some text in that code to alter what kind of parking is required in certain contexts throughout the city. So our team has been working on this proposal since last year. Components were initiated by mayor and council at various study sessions, tasking us with developing ways to move forward on the area's electric vehicle readiness, expanded outdoor seating as a result of the pandemic, and also supporting affordable housing. So I want to take you through the timeline of how the components of the proposal were crafted throughout different touch points with stakeholders, professionals and practitioners, through public meetings and check-ins with mayor and council. So in September of last year, mayor and council did approve this combined approach where we'd weave different feedback sessions into one proposal for them to review this spring. Just kind of going along on that timeline, in October, some EV stakeholder meetings looked at kind of nationwide trends for electric vehicles, started to find the right level for Tucson in that landscape, right sizing it for our local context. When discussing options for outdoor seating, early feedback included that there were concerns about neighborhoods next to restaurants and bars that might change their parking, what kind of effects that might have on those neighborhoods. So that helped point us towards an existing tool called the individual parking plan, an application process to vet those applications for reductions and be proactive about any concerns through that existing tool. Combined public meetings in November helped confirm focus on the EV side on multifamily developments. It also clarified that cost would be a big consideration throughout our discussions. In the outdoor seating discussions, more restaurant input was requested, and also a request for more focused discussions on that topic. So that follow-up resulted in a survey that we distributed to bars and restaurant owners and their supporting organizations, and an additional outdoor seating focused stakeholder meeting followed. Additional touch points like late last year helped confirm a focus on lower cost but ready to use infrastructure on the EV side. So that's more conduit and outlets than charging stations where the context is appropriate. And we got feedback that treating different uses was a good approach because of the different ways that people visit and dwell at different uses. In outdoor seating, we were able to confirm strict standards for outdoor proposed designs and the IPP process in general, especially regarding ADA access and other safety measures. And we've gone through the layers of that vetting process that the application for an IPP covers. So we presented the proposal to Planning Commission in February at a study session where we got feedback to add an exception threshold to retail with lots smaller than 100 spaces to require EV readiness. Also in February, we presented the proposal to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and we received support for that qualification for an reduced parking through the IPP. And so with that, we returned to Planning Commission for a public hearing. After discussion, they voted unanimously in support of the proposal with 2 recommendations to take back to Mayor and Council. Number 1 being that the effects of the ordinance be reviewed in a couple of years, and 2, that further study be done into reduced parking overall for affordable housing. So when this went to Mayor and Council last month, they decided to keep the public hearing open to have more time to engage more people on the details of this proposal. So that's what we're here to do tonight. We also had a meeting last Friday, different time and different context, in person versus this virtual meeting, to give a number of options for people to jump in on this conversation. And what we're really trying to get at is adjustments to the proposal to get it just right for Tucson. The overarching goals and focus are kind of laid out. So we're looking for detailed feedback on what's right and what's not quite right about the proposal. So we'll spend the first part of the meeting tonight focusing on the EV readiness component. And this part tracks back to the adoption of the electric vehicle roadmap that was adopted by Mayor and Council in April of last year. It's a key focus right now in terms of the context of the climate emergency. This particularly is a whole range of strategies to ready Tucson for an eventual shift to electric vehicles. A key short-term action decided then upon approval was to address EV charging capabilities in new development. So with those details to be crafted by engaging the development community, electric vehicle experts, utility company, and environmental stakeholders. Like I mentioned, through a series of iterative meetings, the current proposal is where we're at tonight. The different uses have different requirements for EV charging. And that's laid out here. So the current proposal is this: in new multifamily development, 25% of parking spaces should have a certain level of readiness. So that's made up of 15% of spaces with conduit alone that can be upgraded in the future. And 10% of spaces should have outlets that are ready to use upon construction being complete. So this is the total highest requirement because of the focus on overnight charging in places where people can't install their own charger, like in a single family home. In the next category, office uses are smaller but similar distribution to try to catch EV drivers who might charge during a work shift. So that is broken down into 5% of spaces should have ready to use outlets, and 15% of spaces should have that future ready conduit. And then in new large retail locations that have more than 100 parking spaces, 5% of those spaces should have charging stations, kind of that interface to charge an EV, and 5% should have outlets ready installed. So now we'll go through some of the specific feedback we've heard along the way and point out where in the proposal that's covered. So one thing that's been raised is that EV readiness could be solely market driven. Just to point out that the requirements in the proposal are the baseline minimum. More can be installed for reduced parking. So this is guided by a citywide focus on equity, that access to the cost savings and environmental benefits of switching to EVs should be citywide and not limited to certain areas of the city. There's support for a phased approach to EV infrastructure installation. And just to point out that the different requirements are a future cost savings phased approach. By focusing on conduit and outlets in new construction, those can be upgraded later as demand grows. So avoiding retrofit costs of over 300%, and remembering the building lifetimes of current construction, how those line up with the changes that we see in electric vehicle availability playing out in front of us. So under the topic of electric vehicles, specifically in Tucson, a question has been, are these requirements right-sized for our city? They are assertive, but they align with peer cities like Salt Lake City in Utah and Miami-Dade County in Florida, where current adoption rates are 2.5% and 2%. Where they differ from are examples like many California cities, where they've started to require 50% or even 100% of new parking lots to have some kind of EV readiness in new construction. The current EV adoption rate locally, based on data requested from Arizona MVD, is that 1 in 300 vehicles in the Tucson metro area is electric, and 1,000 are registered in the city itself. And a consumer cost question has been asked, when will the cost of electric vehicles match conventional vehicles? In research, one study points to that happening in the next 5 years. And it's also important to consider the long-term operational cost savings between the two types of vehicles when it comes to ongoing fuel costs and ongoing maintenance costs. So another area of concern has been about what this element might mean for the permitting process through our Department of Planning and Development Services. EV spaces are part of a standard review process required of any commercial development. And while an EV component may add complexity, there won't be a separate review. It's also important to note that the department has recently improved the process and could commit to an activity number within 72 hours of an application, which is what's needed to coordinate with utilities. And then maybe a helpful way to kind of wrap our heads around the scale of this proposal. If the requirements as they stand now were applied to projects reviewed by the department last year, they would have affected 18 multifamily sites, 15 commercial office projects, 3 retail sites out of 35 total because of that threshold, and 1 mixed use multifamily and retail. And then just a few more areas. It's been expressed that, as I mentioned, the EV requirements might, when we're thinking about costs, there's been concerns that the requirements might burden affordable housing and small businesses. As mentioned, multifamily housing is a focus, as is equitable access to EV benefits. About half of people in Tucson rent, and with lack of access to reliable charging in rentals, that's considered a roadblock to adopting EVs on the bigger picture and the larger scale. So with those costs in mind, the proposal focuses on conduit and outlets as opposed to stations where the context is appropriate. And also the 100 space threshold was added in the retail use with those worries about costs as well. And as far as incentives go, the proposal includes reduced overall parking if more than the minimum is installed, and that is to potentially lower overall project costs. Other rebates may be available locally. A recent program from TEP has had even higher rebates for projects that are multifamily or projects that are in disadvantaged communities. So cost has come up consistently throughout this discussion. It's hard to cite specific numbers because there's so many variables in each project. The estimates here are ranges with that in mind, average out across entire lot sizes. In this presentation style, smaller lots result in a higher cost per space when averaged that way. Here, also these costs, they don't include base lot construction costs. They don't include electric upgrades, and they don't include rebates. So you can see in multifamily where there's some higher requirements overall, the costs are averaged out $95 to $960 per space across an entire lot, reflective of project costs that are $25,000 to $1,200. In the office, that's a little bit less because of that smaller percentage, $85 to $900 per space, averaged out an entire lot, reflective of project costs, $23,000 to $1,100, depending on the scale of that project. And in retail, the overall percentages are smaller, but the individual station costs can be higher. And so that average comes through in projects that are $180 to $600 per space, averaged out an entire lot, reflective of project costs that are upwards of $60,000 to $18,000. And the proposed percentages are at the bottom of the screen there for reference. And to touch on incentives, some that we have purview over and some that we certainly don't. Currently included in the proposed amendment are parking reductions for installing more than the minimum. In multifamily and office, for each additional outlet or station, one less parking space can be included. In the retail use, for each additional station, 2 less parking spaces can be included. And then just as an example of something that's outside of our purview, it's subject to availability certainly, but a recent rebate program from TEP can provide rebates of a few $1,000s per approved network station, or up to 75% of the project cost. And those rebates can be even higher in multifamily projects, as I mentioned, and even more in disadvantaged communities or lower income areas. So we'll pause the discussion here we'll pause the presentation, sorry, to have a discussion here to talk about kind of the details where we can tweak this. So our guiding questions here are, is the proposal tailored to Tucson appropriately? And what suggestions do you have to improve the proposal as it stands?
Okay, thanks, Acacia. So now we're going to open it up to your comments and questions. If you can just use the raise hand function, which is under on your menu on reactions. You're also welcome to chat a question or comment. And the links that we just reposted have this presentation, since there's a lot of information and you might want to go back to previous slides for reference. Any comments or questions? Karen, I'm sorry if I mispronounced it.
Hello, this is Karen Potter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to City of Tucson staff and others for putting together this discussion for tonight and for the community conversations you've held thus far. SWEEP is, in general, we were really supportive of the EV readiness provisions that in the proposal that staff has put together. We've been one of the stakeholders that's been involved in this conversation since the very beginning, when you all were looking originally at the single family residential proposal. So we've been really thrilled with the open stakeholder process and have felt we've had a lot of opportunity to kind of discuss things as they've come up, and just appreciated the kind of open conversations everyone has had as a part of the stakeholder process. So thank you for that. I think as a whole, SWEEP is really supportive of the levels in which you have proposed here for the different levels, anywhere from EV capable up to EV installed. Just one thing that we think could be an additional helpful provision or consideration for the retail category. I think when it comes to a replacement ratio for these types of chargers, if you're looking at from level 2 to a DC fast charging service, and this is something I'm thinking about for things like either bigger box retail stores, having a replacement ratio of 5:1 could be really invaluable to help to install lower numbers of DC fast chargers installed and at the different levels of installed, ready, and capable. And that could be helpful for different charging issues as more and more of these vehicles are charging at these bigger locations. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention, and we'd be happy to follow up with a letter. But all in all, we're really supportive with the levels you have that you're showing here on the screen, and we just really appreciate the conversation so far, and looking forward to having more conversations with the mayor and council on this issue as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. Any response from the city? Okay, so and we'll get Colette's chat, and then we'll go to Alexa, Loring, and then Abrisa. So Colette, you use Salt Lake and Florida as your comparison. What is the poverty rate in those cities? Daniel, do you know?
Yeah, offhand, I do not, unfortunately. We can look that up and we can share it with the group. I'm happy to do so.
And then continuing, the development community has a number of legitimate issues with some of your data. Have you done anything to explore their concerns about your cost figures?
Yeah, related to just kind of costs and cost figures, we do understand there's a wide range depending on different types of projects and things of that sort. But we have reached out. We met with, I believe, Rob East to talk a bit about kind of what costs he was seeing with some of their projects, and we are looking into kind of, fact checking some of our data related to costs. But it is definitely what we've seen is a very wide range depending on the site, the project, and the scale of the project as well.
Okay, thanks. And Amanda, or Colette, or Karen, you can look at Amanda Mass's response regarding the poverty levels. Next, let's go for Alexa.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alexa Scholl. I'm with the Tucson Metro Chamber, and I'm also a Ward 1 resident. I would say in terms of whether or not the chamber feels that these proposed changes are consistent with the city of Tucson and where we are, I would say there are some concerns about the peer cities used. Kind of going back to the previous person who commented, there is a big discrepancy in terms of the poverty rate and median income between Tucson and a number of the other peer cities that were looked at. And so I think that's something to consider, especially since the cost of EVs, as Acacia mentioned, aren't quite comparable right now to a gas-powered vehicle. And then also, I think in terms of how these code amendments could be improved, our conversations with the development community have really centered around this either being market-driven or completely incentivized. I think the current incentive as it sits isn't very appealing or attractive. And we've worked with, and I'm happy to send it to PDSD staff, we've worked on some really detailed incentives that would be much more appealing, and we think that the development community would actually take advantage of. And then also, we understand that it's likely the intention of mayor and council that they'll want to adopt some ordinance or requirement. And we would really like to see all of that shifted to conduit and some outlets. We just think it's at this point not appropriate to require stations to be installed, especially since the technology is still changing. The demand for EVs is just not really present in the city of Tucson. Even on the heat map that the city presented, a lot of those who own EVs live outside of the city of Tucson limits. And so we just think at this point, requiring stations to be installed, there's some concern about that. And then one question that I've heard come up a number of times that I've yet to see an answer for is if a development is moving forward with requirements that may be adopted, and there's problems with getting the infrastructure, whether it's because of labor shortages or supply chain shortages, would the city still administer a certificate of occupancy even if the EV project in their parking lot isn't completed? I know that's a big concern when some of this stuff is out of the control of the developers. So those are just a few of the thoughts that we have over at the chamber in discussions with our development community stakeholders.
Thanks, Alexa. Daniel, did you have a response to the question or no?
The question, yeah. So what we've done in the past with certain circumstances, as long as health, life, safety is met and things of that sort. And there may be some sort of hiccup related to getting, I guess either supplies for conduit or building materials or things of that sort for certain things. We have allowed for temporary C of O in those situations. So we have heard that comment from the chamber and from several of the people from the development community, and we are looking into that, but making sure that there is an avenue in situations such as that.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Loring.
2 points. One, I don't think there's quite enough distinction between the stations. We're talking just about stations and outlets. Outlets come in lots of different voltages, lots of different capacities, and certainly DC fast chargers can be 20 or 30 times as fast as a level 2 charger. There isn't really much distinction between the level 3 chargers, which can be very fast and very expensive, versus the level 2 chargers, which are much slower and much cheaper. I think we need to get a few finer points on how those might trade off. I mean, if one fast charger can do 20 times what a level 2 charger can do, there needs to be some fine tuning in there. The second point I'd like to make is that the adoption of EVs is difficult to predict, but it is very clear that all the major manufacturers of automobiles have made huge commitments to EVs, and to extend the current adoption rate at its present level into the future is going to be a mistake. I believe that this is going to accelerate very quickly, and to assume that we're not going to be at 50% or 30% until way out in the future is going to be an expensive mistake. We need to make sure that the conduit and outlets and preparation is ready when this happens, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Lauren. Thanks. Let's do Abrisa, and then we'll read Mr. Limeroth's comment. Go ahead, Abrisa.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here and for this presentation. I'm kind of agreeing with everybody here. Is there's a cost factor in having the infrastructure in, as Mr. Green said, is agreeable. The thing I really am struggling with, because I don't have an EV currently, may not ever have one, but is what is the electrical cost? I mean, is there, as far as is charging a small EV overnight through, say, a level 2 charger, how much does it actually cost the consumer like a kilovolt charge? Because I know that just like water rates, you use a little bit more, you keep getting charged more. So is there a way that if you have an EV charger at your home, you're not going to get a stepped up rate or get a brownout? Just asking. Thank you.
Okay. Next, let's just read. I'm going to let the city just speak up if you have a response in right away, and otherwise some responses might happen in the chat, and otherwise they're gathering all of your comments and questions. So Mr. Limeroth, as a contractor, has done several EV proposals for clients. It's obvious the electrical service is often the limiting factor for retrofit installations. In the case of the proposed conduit requirements, is there also a requirement that the electrical service be sized for future EV capacity? And I believe that was responded to in the chat. And then Karen Potter says, I agree with your concern on multifamily. That is why SWEEP supports the percentage for multifamily to ensure that when more EVs become readily available, renters, low-income customers, and others will have equal access to EV charging. Without the requirement, it will be harder for these customers to have equitable access to this technology in the very near future. And now let's go to Amanda, then John.
Hi. Yeah, I really want to echo Karen's comment there. I appreciate her putting that in there. And Abriza, something about pricing, it can really depend on, and especially since this is a commercial application, it really depends on who's the owner of the station and what rates they set. So there could be, and something I think would be interesting for the city to explore is, and especially affordable housing situations, if there's any kind of carrot of having reduced rates or free charging, because I know that that can actually be a benefit for folks who have lower incomes, that they can then access free or reduced rate charging, not at their home or their apartment, but they can get it at their office or the place of work, which can be a really big benefit. I did also want to note on the income eligible or folks who have lower incomes, that the cost to operate EVs has been found to be overall less than internal combustion cars. And so while that overall front cost is still high, you're not paying for gas, you're not paying for as much maintenance like oil changes and such like that. So I think these are all things that we need to be considering and thinking about overall when we're talking about EVs. And I'll disclose that I'm like on the EV board train, but I'm really a public transit expert, and I'd rather see public transportation investments than a bunch of EV chargers, but I'm supportive of this proposal generally. And I think it's really important to highlight here that this is for new construction and not for retrofit applications. I've done a lot of work in the EV, researching EVs with businesses, and the cost to do a retrofit is so expensive and exorbitant that this is like really doing businesses a favor at this point, because to Lauren's point, you know, manufacturers are setting the stage. BMW is going to be all EV by 2025, right? And so that's going to trickle down economics. We know how that works, right? But you know, in this case, like we are seeing the stage of manufacturers are really changing gears, and that if we don't start to build the infrastructure out at all, then people will have load issues at their home. They're going to have to do electrical panels upgrades themselves, which can be really expensive. I think it makes a lot more sense to be planning this ahead in our commercial developments, especially the new construction. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. John.
Yes, hi. Good evening. Thanks for having this meeting. Very informative. I've worked in multifamily industry for over 2 decades, and I'm slowly transitioning into this market, EV. I'm a vendor, but I have very limited knowledge, but you guys have all made great points. When it comes to multifamily, I think what the goal is to have the charging station. Someone pointed out a lot of folks live outside of Tucson that have EVs, but they do commute into town. So what the goal is to do a slow trickle charge, like the gentleman that went before me, Lauren, I think his name was, you charge at home and then you charge at work, and you can use that level 2. You don't have to have a fast charger. Another thing with the cost of it, very minimal. It's by the kilowatt hour. I know in California, you know, everything's more expensive over there. So in the multifamily, you can set your rates and you can be very smallly profitable. Commercially, you can just set it so the folks pay by the usage. They use an RFID or use their credit card and do it. And that's more of a, you know, just a quick hit. You go to lunch, you go, you know, shopping or what have you. So it's a very fascinating and interesting field in the fact that there's, you know, it's coming. I don't think any multifamily owners want to have it done. So with TEP, if they're offering a rebate program, and I know they're mulling it over, as soon as that's implemented, I think you guys will see the multifamily part of it will take off, because they'll take advantage of those rebates, and then their properties will be taken care of, and that will take care of a big chunk of this need, because if 50%, it was pointed out before, 50% of folks in the Tucson area or in Tucson itself, Metro City, are renters, a large portion of them are at multifamily locations, and they can hook up there. And then the property, the owners, they can charge as little as 1 cent per kilowatt hour if they want to, you know, for disadvantaged community, low income or what have you. So it's really up to the ownership when it comes to multifamily. Commercial might be a little bit different, but multifamily could do that. So just to try to fill in some questions and some, you know, blanks if there are any. So thank you.
Thanks, John. And Lauren is saying that charging my EV at home costs about $8 per 300 miles. And a new average price of a new EV, $35,000 to $150,000. Karen.
Thank you so much. This is Karen Potter with SWEEP, the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I just wanted to raise one additional comment to add to this great discussion. Someone mentioned something about, the cost of charging EVs and how that varies between different buildings and location, and will that impact electric bills? Something right now that Tucson Electric Power and utilities really across the state and really the country are looking at ways to be able to set electric rates in a way that helps to make electric vehicle charging cheaper depending on the time of day that you're charging it. So essentially it's kind of this idea of what we call managed charging. So if you are charging your vehicle at times of the day that are essentially cheaper and easier for the utility to run, then the savings from being able to charge at that cheaper time of the day are going to start showing up in your purchasing of that electricity, and it'll eventually kind of trickle down into your bills. So we call it this managed charging effect that helps to inadvertently help to drive down costs overall. And so that's why we see a lot of these savings helping to drive down costs, even on the electric side of the equation. So with all of that in mind, there are a lot of different specific electric vehicle time of use rate plans that are coming out from utilities. And this is a conversation that TEP has been having often. And they have started on this process as well to provide different rates that help customers meet them where they are, so that they're incentivized to charge at the right time of day to ensure that they're helping to get those savings in their pocketbooks. And also help to make the grid run in a more efficient way to help with reliability and so many other things. So I just wanted to add that to the record. I think that part of this equation is really going to help for everyone to start seeing those savings being passed down eventually down the pipeline as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. Ben.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared. Ben Bueller Garcia with the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. We've had a lot of conversations on the other side and other departments of the city of Tucson about the real crisis of housing affordability in Tucson. And it just strikes me as odd that we're going to address housing affordability by making construction of new multifamily housing less affordable. I get the equity issue. And I want to say our members are driven by market demand. They embrace the idea of the move to electric vehicles, and certainly will be the first to move in that direction when the demand is such, their tenants are in a position to demand that. It seems unrealistic, though, to force builders to place electric vehicle charging stations in demographics where they're least likely to adopt EVs because of the nature of their income. Raising rents now for future return just doesn't seem to make sense. Now, there's some experts in the room, and I'll defer to them, but just some basic research shows that the average lifespan of the battery cells for EVs is 8 years. I know some folks have said there's lower maintenance cost overall, but once that cell is discharged, the average cost for replacement is $10,000 to $18,000, as best as I can tell. To me, that's the equivalent of selling someone a used car that is about to have the transmission blow up. And I don't think that's what we want to do. Again, our members support this. We would ask that you allow this to be strictly market driven. Maybe just putting in the underground utilities necessary to adapt this when the demand comes, and let the market drive it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Lauren, and then Amanda.
One difficult reality is that the electricity charge at these fast chargers and even level 2 chargers in some places, the electric charge is frequently 2 to 3 or even as much as 4 times the price of the actual electricity if you charge at home. Now, how the market is going to adjust to this problem, it really has a profound effect. As I've said in chat, I get 300 miles for $8 worth of electricity, but that's charging at home. It could be $25 if I charge on the street or someplace else. So there's an opportunity here to make charging affordable for people of modest incomes. And it is a factor, and it has a very significant effect on the adoption of the EVs. If the cost of energy is a tenth, it cost me $80 to fill up an SUV, and it cost me $8 to fill up my Bolt electric vehicle, and they're both 300-mile vehicles. So it costs me 10 times as much to buy gas as it does to buy electricity. That's the market is going to reflect that difference. And if people of lower income can afford, if they can afford to look at the long term, that's going to come to the fore pretty quickly, because it's a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Amanda's comment in the chat, the average internal combustion engine car today can be expected to last 200,000 miles, according to Car and Driver, which makes maintaining a traditional vehicle about $20,200 and an EV $12,200, an $8,000 difference with a source. And Mr. Limeroth, level 2 chargers at retail locations don't make sense in my view, given the miles per hour of charging. They make more sense in MF. Oh gosh, I should know what MF means.
Multifamily.
Oh, multifamily, right, sorry. And office settings where cars are parked for a number of hours. And then we'll go to Alexa and then Karen's comment. Go ahead, Alexa.
Oh, thank you. Just a couple other points. I know we've kind of talked about the costs, and I don't mean to kind of beat this issue to death, but something else that's come up is just additional costs outside of what the city is kind of quoted or put, for example. So after the installation, there's going to be additional operation and maintenance costs, including ensuring these charging stations and infrastructure. And we've done some research on a number of examples of vandalisms with cables being cut, just all sorts of vandalism happening to these charging stations. And even there was a local example, Culinary Dropout recently had to replace their 3 charging units within the last 60 days, and it was $1,300 per unit. So there's concern about once they're installed, this operation maintenance that comes with them, and then also when things like vandalism happens, there being additional cost. And then also if they're trying to insure them, eventually not being able to be insured because of numerous claims on the charging stations. And also just underutilization. The goal would be to install infrastructure that the developers can recoup their costs on. And there's a lot of data out there about even in urban areas with a lot of EVs, charging stations in public spaces just really aren't used enough. So just concerned about the demand not being there. Even if the demand for EVs in Tucson increases, the demand for charging in public spaces, as kind of as Stephen mentioned, in places where you're not staying for very long, those chargers don't necessarily make sense. And then lastly, right now, if you look at Tucson's EV data, 57% of EVs are Teslas, and Tesla has proprietary charging. So even the infrastructure that would be installed right now would not work for Teslas. And I know we're kind of talking long term, with more EVs coming onto the market, but we just feel like installing stations now just doesn't make sense with the current demand we're seeing, and the fact that there's likely going to be changes in technology probably here in the short term, and it would just make sense to really focus on conduit and allow for our EV market to mature and the technology to change, and then when the market calls for it, that conduit can then be turned into outlets or stations. So just a couple other thoughts and perspective from the commercial industry.
Thanks, Alexa. Okay, our final comment will be Amanda. Karen has some chat comments that I'm not going to be able to read because we do need to move on to the next topic, but feel free to continue to chat. And there's again the comment card link. So Amanda?
Thank you. Ben, I did a quick Google about battery life expectancy, and I wonder if it was just a misreading. It looks like the average warranty lasts for a minimum of 8 years or up to 100,000 miles, not that they last not that they only have an 8-year life. And some of them are also up to 10 years or 100,000 miles. So I think that's pretty standard with what you'd expect with cars in general, with major maintenance and overhauls. The other thing I wanted to go back to, Ben, about a comment that you made about where we were focusing investment of EVs and thinking about investment in lower income areas. And I think like really what we should be thinking about is long-term. If we don't put EV stations in new construction that would serve lower income residents, then I think ultimately all you're really doing is creating EV charging deserts for when EVs become more affordable for more of the community and it becomes more saturated, right? And then Alexa, to your point about the demand, I think what you just characterized is the classic chicken and the egg with the whole EV industry, and everything that we see is that demand is being stifled because of the lack of availability for EV chargers. So by saying we should not install them because we don't have the demand, well, the biggest barrier is because people's concern for not having places to charge. And so this is a really natural, easy first step. And I think you can see here too that, you know, the focus is on providing outlets and conduits and not in stations. So that really addresses that concern about technology advancing and that we are prioritizing, just laying the groundwork so that the stations can be installed when ready. And then I have one more thought. I also, yeah, no, I'm just gonna stop there, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And if you remember, you can put it in the chat. All right, so we're going to shift now to the IPP topic. Go ahead, Acacia.
Great, thank you again, everybody, for a really thorough discussion on it. We are taking these comments. They will go back to mayor and council, and I'll have a little bit more info on that a little bit later. We are going to shift this part of the meeting tonight to talk about the individual parking plan and the areas that it could apply to if this proposal is approved. So this component of the proposal came out of 2 recent initiatives, the response to COVID allowing temporary outdoor seating in areas that it wasn't before. This has been a success in a number of ways. And so there's interest to provide a long-term program that benefits the public and businesses. And then another important part is action items laid out in the recent housing affordability strategy to support citywide efforts for more affordable housing options. But first, on the outdoor seating part, it's kind of the more complicated part, so we will speak a little bit more about it. It's helpful first to clarify that there are 2 different programs even within that. In the downtown area of Tucson, 4th Avenue, you're more likely to see seating in the right-of-way, which is the sidewalk or in the street, usually the parking lane next to the curb. That program is allowed where the context is the right match for that, and that program is run by the Department of Transportation and Mobility because of their jurisdiction over the right-of-way. What we're focusing on here in this proposal is what it's kind of like more places throughout the city. If you think about our development patterns, the kind of strip malls, sometimes box store patterns where the parking lots are the spaces being reimagined here. Streets are too big and too fast for seating to make sense within the right of way there. So it's using the number of parking spaces in a lot where zoning regulations come in, and the potential to apply for less than what's required may allow for more restaurants and bars to have the opportunity to add these outdoor seating spaces citywide. So this is how parking is currently applied in these locations. For bars and restaurants, it's some of the highest requirements of any use. In bars, it's 1 parking space for every 50 square feet and 1 for every 100 square feet in restaurants. Currently, bars and restaurants can't apply to reduce that number if they are not in a mixed use location, even if they can show that they don't need them all. And that can be very different throughout different places in the city. The tipping point here, without allowing a way for these businesses to ask or apply, is that the existing temporary patios might not be able to continue when this temporary relaxed zoning expires next year. And other businesses might not get the chance to even put out seating in this way. When it comes to parking in housing, currently there's no distinction between requirements for market rate housing versus affordable housing. It ranges between 1.25 to 2.5 spaces per dwelling unit based on the overall size of the apartment building. Currently, affordable housing is not a qualifying reason to ask for reduced parking through an IPP, but allowing it could be a way to make affordable housing projects more financially feasible, or as it's been pointed out, more apartments might fit onto a site if less parking is needed, helping boost the city's total units of housing. So we've referenced the IPP a lot, the individual parking plan. It's a successful tool to justify less parking in some uses and some places in the city. But what it is a site-specific application to ask to provide less parking than the code required numbers. The PDSD director approves or denies the request based on the application. The whole program, it's really important to emphasize, is case by case. It's not a citywide blanket waiver. If this proposal were approved, it's not saying that the next day that any business could swap out their parking for these reasons. It's a whole application process. And it's been successful this far in the places that it's been allowed. There's been 42 approved sites since 2009, and none have had complaints about the parking or traffic conditions. That's likely because the application is pretty thorough. It requires notification and a meeting with adjacent neighborhoods to show that noise and light will be minimized, that vehicle access and parking will be deterred and prevented in neighborhoods. That notification kicks in if the site is within 300 feet of residential zones. The application, the proposal has to show existing and proposed configurations, showing that it doesn't remove any ADA parking or ADA access. It's a stronger application if the business can show that alternate modes of transportation are possible, and if existing parking lots nearby can be shared. Sort of a more efficient use of asphalt if a church only needs parking for 1 day a week, or one business closes as another one reaches its peak. That's a really strong application point. There's also an application fee to apply for an IPP. And then when it is about outdoor seating, that design process has standards as well, including not removing ADA or bicycle parking, avoiding light intrusion to neighborhoods, seating and speakers. Thinking about noise, they have to be located specific distances away from housing. Separation between seats and vehicles, both parked and moving, is utmost concern. Those are strict standards there in the design. And also following liquor license regulations and fire review where applicable. The super site-specific thing about the IPP, one of the most protective parts of it, is that approval can come with a specific requirement for an application. For example, maybe a business asks to reduce their lot by one number and a smaller number is approved. Or maybe seating gets placed on a different side of the lot, maybe near the street as opposed to the residential side of a lot. So that's a part where there's lots of protections through this IPP process. So the current proposal is to expand the use of the individual parking plan application to include affordable housing as a permitted type of development, and removing an existing exception for bars and restaurants. And similar to before, I'll go through some of the feedback we've heard along the way and where we feel it's addressed in the proposal. Under the overall topic of the program necessity, some things that's really driving this proposal. So what happens to the temporary patios if the IPP isn't approved for restaurants and bars? In January of next year, the temporary program will expire. Without a way to vet a process to switch parking spaces out for seating, a lot of the existing patios might not be permitted. It's been pointed out that when the IPP process was first implemented, bars and restaurants were prohibited from using this based on public input. A lot of things have happened in the last 10 years, namely citywide climate action goals, our focus on affordable housing, lots of investment in new mobility options, and ways to be more flexible to support business have all emerged as really important goals citywide. There's been the climate emergency that's resulted in the current developing of the climate action and adaptation plan. There's also been Move Tucson and a complete streets policy, all these investments in enhanced transit options. Rideshare was invented in the last 10 years. There's a lot more options than were available to people 10 years ago. And even in this example, the success of the temporary patios has helped people reimagine what parking spaces can be used for. Other comments about the program, it's been asked if these patio spaces are even used year round. In response to a survey we sent out to bar and restaurant owners, 69% of respondents said that they would use these spaces all year. 19% said it was only applicable seasonally. And just to point out the difference between this program and what is existing in kind of the downtown and entertainment district areas, those areas, because of their urban form, their urban design, the denser development there, they already have, those are a result of tools that are already in place to reduce parking through the infill incentive district and zoning overlays. The IPP is this site-specific application that makes this an option citywide, where these downtown and urban overlay zones don't apply to other areas of the city. And then again, for scale, to help us wrap our heads around this, how many parking spaces have typically been used for outdoor seating? In the temporary program, it's been an average of 3 to 4 parking spaces used for patios, and that adds about 9 seats per former parking space. The application process, I've covered a bit about it. We're talking about the concern about everybody who might be impacted by this. So the business and neighbors. The application includes that neighborhood meeting to talk through any issues if the site is within 300 feet of a residential area. That application includes noting the circulation of traffic, parking analysis at peak use. So when there's the most people visiting the business, they have to demonstrate how they're going to mitigate any issues. And as I mentioned, that ability to add site-specific conditions to an approval. Is the IPP application the best tool for these scenarios? We're just pointing out that the application is an established process. It's got a good track record of vetting and addressing issues proactively. Expanding the IPP eligibility, because it's an existing tool, it avoids adding a new or separate process that staff and businesses need to navigate through. I've mentioned that locations sharing parking lots is a really good way to make a strong application by utilizing parking that's nearby. And the costs involved in an IPP application include that application fee. It likely requires the work of a consultant to conduct a parking analysis and the other components of that application. Throughout, who gets notified, who knows what if there's a project nearby. As I mentioned, 42 IPP applications have been approved since the program started where they are allowed. No complaints have been submitted regarding parking or traffic congestion, likely because of those layers of the application process. Ward offices are always notified if there is a mailing list for neighborhood notification. So that is another ally on the side of any neighborhood concerns. And then what happens if problems arise after an IPP is approved? That's also covered within the program because approval can be revoked if conditions are not being met. And that's listed in the UDC. If a development is operated in a manner that violates the conditions of that approval, the use may be suspended or terminated. And that's written out in the code there. That's through code enforcement. Ward offices can be very helpful in getting that information back to PDSD if there are, if the application somehow hasn't caught any concerns going through. Safety is a big concern and it's built into the program as well. As I mentioned, ADA accessibility must be maintained in any outdoor seating design. You can't take away that parking. You have to maintain pedestrian and ADA access from parking spaces to entrances. And there has to be safe separation of seating areas from moving traffic. Overflow parking in adjacent neighborhoods has been a concern. Through the IPP, an applicant must show that they will implement strategies to prevent that overflow parking. Parking spaces in a neighborhood cannot be used to justify removing parking spaces in a parking lot. And I mentioned those site-specific conditions can be required to get to an approval. Keeping more parking then is proposed to remove or altering a site design. So we'll pause the slides here to open it back up to discussion here. We'd like to hear from people tonight. Are there other criteria that could be added to the IPP application? What suggestions do you have to make this more effective so that it is fair for businesses who might want this opportunity and to address concerns that neighbors might have?
Thanks, Acacia. Okay, now we're going to open it up to questions and comments. There's a lot going on in the chat, a little too much for me to read every single comment. So let's go ahead and take hands. And if you want to share some of your comments in addition through that, you can. But we're capturing all the comments, just so you know, as well as recording this meeting, taking notes, etc. You can raise your hand if you have a comment or question. All right, so Corin or Daniel or Acacia, what is the, if nobody has any additional comments beyond what's in the chat? Okay, Amanda.
Hi. Well, I just want to say that I appreciate this effort. I have not and will continue to not eat indoors until COVID numbers get better. So I really appreciate that this has become available to businesses. It's been a way for have a little bit of normalcy in our life through the pandemic. And I think it will be a good thing to have in place as climate change and the world continues to kind of have more of these types of events. I also, just reflect growing up in Tucson that parking is so often just the butt of a joke here and how abundant it is. And seeing something like this to have it repurposed for better uses of actually active uses and bringing people to spaces that are often dead, overheated, putting shrubbery. I really appreciate this direction. I think it's something that we need to do to be mindful of climate change, to also reduce our dependency on cars. I see saw some comments about concerns about drunk driving. And, I really think that when you're reducing parking, you're decreasing the incentive to drive to a place. And so in fact, I would if I know, for example, if I want to go to Casa Video, parking kind of sucks over there sometimes. And so I'll just bike, take a bus, or catch a lift, and so rather than trying to deal with some of that. So I think that this could actually have a benefit in discouraging that type of action. And then let's see, one more thing. Nope, I think that's it for now. I think some of the comments I can appreciate about wanting to ensure that there is, since this is more of an administrative process, which I think is the benefit to have it streamlined for businesses. So trying to balance that while also trying to appreciate that public comment should be noted and clearly just, displayed when these types of proposals are coming through. I think that will be important to ensure that people who are approving it are very clear about what the neighbors are concerned about. So maybe there can be some kind of middle ground for keeping it streamlined, but also making sure that neighbors' voices are heard. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Abrisa?
Hi, thank you. I've got a few questions. So you were talking about in the IPP as far as granting these as far as extension, and they follow these certain things, and if they don't, then they have to either bring it up to the specifications needed. So at that point, if there are complaints, oh, from the neighbors or somebody else, or somebody in a wheelchair can't get down the sidewalk anymore because they pushed out a little bit too far. So does that come back up before, because you said that within 300 feet of this, and frankly, 300 feet isn't that far, within 300 feet, and this is a standard mailing procedure through the city for like a public hearing, 300 or 400 feet. Does that also include all neighborhood associations that are within a mile of the site? Because I know on public hearings that anything that happens, that it also the neighborhood facilitators, chairs, or presidents of the adjoining neighborhood associations within a mile of that, are they also notified of this IPP application? Because many times than not, someone who lives close to something like this might get this notice, say, well, there's nothing I can do, I'm not going to go to this. But neighborhood leaders, in their quest to be a neighborhood leader and be involved in their community, are always interested in things that are going on. So are the neighborhood leaders within a mile of a IPP going to be notified?
There, Breeza, I can just kind of clarify real quickly. Yeah, it's the standard 400-foot procedure. So all properties within 400 feet would be notified for that neighborhood meeting, and then all of the neighborhood associations within a mile.
Okay, well, this is my clarification, because I know the 300 was changed to 400 feet a couple of years ago, but everybody keeps writing down 300 feet. So
this one's a little different because what triggers it is an actual straight line distance of 300 feet from the property line to an R3 or more restrictive zone. So it's different from the old 300 feet, which became 400 feet. So it's 300 feet that triggers it, and then it's 400 feet that's notified. I know it's confusing. I'm sorry.
oh, so if it's not within 300, if there's not a residential area within 300 feet, it won't trigger a notification?
That is correct, yes.
So that means that even if a neighborhood is 320 feet away, a residential zone is 320 away, nobody will get notified of the IPP, is that correct?
Yeah, if there is no residential zone within greater than 300 feet, or within less than 300 feet, there wouldn't be notification for that.
And that's in a circular, that's like if you just basically put a pin down and draw the round circle around it within that 300 feet, correct?
Well, ultimately, it's the whole property, and then you buffer 300 feet from that property line.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Can I make one more comment on that? You said ask for suggestions. My suggestion for this is that the buffer be, because in a lot of these areas we're talking about, a buffer be extended maybe to 400 feet or at 300 feet still, that if one of these IPP is going through, that all neighborhood associations that are within a mile of this proposed IPP be notified, all neighborhood chairs. That would be just a mailing to the neighborhood chairs, and they could talk amongst themselves to see if there's any issues that they specifically know about because they live in the area. Thank you.
Thanks, Arisa. That's noted. Any other questions, comments? And I think Corin shared a link for some additional information. And if you all click on the comment link, as well as the presentation link, if you have any thoughts after the meeting ends, you're welcome to submit any further comments or questions through that link. Alexa?
When does that comment card close? Like, do we have a few days if we think of anything, or is it just tonight?
Yeah,
I will stay open. It won't close tonight.
Okay. All right, so our city team, you want to do some wrap up? Daniel or Acacia?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for your discussion and your comments. As mentioned, we've been taking them through the chat and through that comment card. Just want to say again that that will not close tonight. We will keep that open. You can also share that link if that works for you. We have had these meetings last Friday and tonight. Another meeting will be focused on just the IPP. It's being hosted by Ward 6 on this Thursday night. We don't have that info since we are not hosting it, but we will be attending that. We can get that info out to you. It will be, as I said, just focused on the IPP component of this proposal. In any case, feedback from all three of these meetings will be incorporated into the proposal so far. It'll be taken back to mayor and council. The public hearing that has been continued is likely to pick up again this summer. We've also got the link for the presentation materials from tonight up on the screen there. So I guess if that is everything for tonight, we will close up and you have access to that other information. We thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you all taking the time on a evening.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.